Привет, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And I changed my camera around a bit because of just to make it look nicer and for maneuverability. I also tried to do my hair because I'm like, I'm not going to let my 9-year-old niece do a better job on my hair and makeup than me. And she watches TikTok videos and she's 9, and I'm like, she can't be better than me at hair and makeup, and she is. And today you have this disaster here because I think I forgot the concealer or something. So I hope you can you guys hear me? I just feel so weird when the chat's quiet because I think you can't hear me. Um, yeah. So let's see. I'm having some late night coffee because I always need coffee. Hello, Anon No Names. Okay, so today we have Arun Chaudhary as a guest. He was Obama's cameraman. He worked for Bernie Sanders and so much more. And let's see, what else do we have to talk about? Um, Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty because then basically the judge rigged the verdict for him in many ways. And it's like, what you have to understand is that he's neither special or unique. Cases like these where they just have open hunting season where they shoot people for sport, what happens in Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever the US Army occupies stuff. But those don't make it as big because it didn't happen in, was it Minnesota or Wisconsin? I can't remember. And but unfortunately, we need to remember that the system is working as it's designed. So, and we also have to remember that there are thousands, if not millions, of Rittenhouses in the U.S. Army and the police force and the U.S. Army, and God knows what they're doing in Afghanistan. Because you only hear about the mass graves 20 years later, and those are what you know about. Now, imagine what is going. Exactly, as Wayne said. The only difference is that this was broadcast. Actually, the reason the Marines got caught hunting Afghans for sport because they made a video broadcasted of themselves too. So otherwise, they would have been scot-free. And yeah. So Janet has a family emergency, so you've just got me. And I'm a bit of a mess in many ways. I hope I look decent. I can't look at myself in the camera to see if I look decent. So I'm like, and anyways, please become a paid subscriber or whatnot. And we'll be, we will, have Arun Chaudhary. We'll talk a lot about Lenin, his life in Berlin, his the ethics of everything, and we also talk about Indian cinema. And we're gonna have a movie night. So thank you, Jamie Brown. I can never look as good as you though. If you are who you are on TikTok, we need you to have you on to read. And so, with no further ado, I will be back at the end for questions, and I'll also be back to read Nadezhda Remembers live. Give me a few minutes. I don't know what's going on. Okay, so let's see. We do share video. Tell me if you can hear it now. Welcome to another episode of Late Nights with Lenin. Today we have a very special guest. Now can you hear me? He was known as the presidential photographer to both the Obama White House, and he was involved in majority of the ad campaigns for the Bernie's presidential run, and he also wrote a book way back in the day. We have Arun Chaudhary.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So what was the book? I can't remember the book.
First cameraman. I mean, it's a
First
long time
cameraman.
now. It's about 10 years old, so it was before Obama was even reelected. But rather than be about contemporary politics, I tried to kind of look at filmmaking and American propaganda and kind of how information is disseminated through the art and science of film.
Oh yeah, well, there's actually a really funny thing. I think it was like a '92 documentary where they were talking about the presidential candidates, and then like somehow they had the special guy, and then the other ones like they put on really bright lights to make them look sweaty or something.
Yeah, well, actually, in the first debate with Nixon and Kennedy, they had the temperature turned up, and Nixon just looked so sweaty and horrible on TV that actually, when you looked at the polling of people who thought Nixon, who won the debate based on the radio, they all said overwhelmingly Nixon because they couldn't see him. But on the TV, and it was one of the first times it had been televised and the lights were so bright and so hot, everyone said Kennedy won because he didn't look like this sort of sweaty animal.
Oh, and Kennedy's better looking, and yeah, that makes sense. And I get a big impression that most elections in the U.S. are not that different from, say, a movie or a reality show. And since you've been the first cameraman, what do you think?
Look, I think that I can't say if it's a reality show or if it's a game show or whatever it is, but what I will say is that politics is divorced from policy in a way that the words would not normally make you think they are. And I think 2016 is probably the best example. Before Bernie Sanders entered the race, and then even then only shifted somewhat, you had the Republicans and Democrats, the two major parties in the United States, switching positions on foreign policy and economy. Just switching positions. One went from being interventionist and protectionist into being the opposite, free trade and bring troops home. They just switched positions on everything. And this wasn't interesting to the press. This wasn't a news story. Nobody talked about this. It was like, wow, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are offering drastically different visions than their parties have in the last 40, 50 years. Because it's not that. It's allegiance to a team. And so I would say it's sort of a feeling of sports as much as it's anything else. People sort of feel an affinity to their team, and they root for their team, and they vote for their team. And the worldview behind it doesn't always jive with what that is, and that's why you see people voting against their interest, quote unquote.
Yeah, I reject the voting against their interest because that implies that you are of their interest and you probably aren't.
That's right. That's why we put these things in quotes.
And okay, so now I guess we also there's a lot of theories from the 2016 election that I kind of want to review with you. If millions of donors give a candidate just $27 a month, they will be beholden only to. Sorry, that was
If that was your Bernie Sanders impression, I'm gonna have to ask you just to stop because it is not working for me.
Okay, how do I do it? I need to do a better Bernie. Okay, can you do a Bernie Sanders impression?
Oh, if I have to, yeah. I will. This is an impression of him, a real conversation you had with me on the plane. Arun, if you could just shush on the plane, you have one of those voices that's very penetrating when you talk, it hurts people's heads. And so if you could please just keep it down when you're on the plane, it would help me concentrate while I'm trying to do things. Thank you so much.
I love that, man. Even that is so real, and it's more endearing. Okay, so basically the idea was that people were all gonna give like $27 or $5 a month to in the model of a brand new Congress model, and then you'd get this like magical progressive people who were not beholden to the lobbies or whatever, but that didn't pan out.
It's not a bad idea. Okay, I just want to say that at the beginning. Like the idea there has to be a counterbalance.
It sounds like a good idea.
To the torrent of money that is put into elections makes sense at first. And then I think I've sort of soured on this very quickly, and we've had conversations about this. Because when you're fighting what is essentially a symmetrical war, which is not a war we would recommend anyone fight, with people who have more money than you, then what we're and asking people to do is to spend what little money they have left in something we're pretty sure they'll lose. And this is an endless spiral of doom. This is not a ladder of engagement. This is your very last bit of money before you just don't have any anymore.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misheard you. You said asymmetrical, and I misheard it as symmetrical war.
We need to engage in asymmetrical warfare when we do these sort of donations to match, when we have poor people try to match donations to rich people, that's having asymmetrical sides fight a symmetrical war, which is asymmetric, which is unfair.
Yeah,
and so when you have a professional class of people whose job it is to kind of extract people's last $27 that they need for the trailer rent, to actually, vote for a candidate who may not win and who, fact, is probably likely not to win. I don't know. And do I have a better idea? Not really, but as I'm sure you speak of often on your show, traditional revolutions are usually paid for by rich people. Rich people have the money. That's why they pay for things very often.
I mean, Lenin, in 1908, they had the Tbilisi Great Bank Heist, and so the Bolsheviks robbed a bank, and that was great.
Yes.
Because they robbed a bank, they weren't beholden to any
The Bolsheviks called it expropriation, right? Yeah.
I don't know what they called it, but it's not.
Comrade Stalin was one of the best at it. He was an expropriator of rare genius. Yeah.
He was the Tbilisi bank heist is what. I mean, if there's somebody like you who's a good movie director, that would be like a
fine film.
It'll be better than Ocean's 11 because of all the weird things that happen. It would be a great heist film.
It's true, and you would see in other places, that's why there is sometimes natural alliances between what normally would be considered criminal elements, whether they are drug dealers, narcotic traffickers, weapons dealers, and insurgent movements on the left and the right. That's why these things kind of naturally happen sometimes, is because things need money.
Yeah.
And you can't get money from where there's no money, right? I forget the name of the criminal, but an American bank robber, they said, "Why do you rob banks?" And he said, "Because that's where the money is, stupid."
A few months ago, actually last year, we interviewed this guy from Blaking Gang, Torken Lausen, and he was from Denmark, and what he did was he robbed all the banks and sent the money to Palestine and Nelson Mandela. So he was and he got caught, and he got 10-year prison sentence, which I thought was unfair. But so that's another check out our podcast episode with that. But he robbed a bank,
and that's a revolutionary act.
Yeah, he literally gave the money to Palestine and African National Congress.
That is beautiful stuff.
Yeah, and not that we're advocating any heist, but but the ethics of it seems worse.
Look, if anyone is considering heisting, we're just recommending some organizations you might want to consider when it comes time to holiday giving.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so for me, one of the most unethical, I'm just going to name her. Okay, unethical things was that this one congresswoman, basically said she was getting $5 and $10 and $20 from people, and then she gave it to the DCCC, who's it was so horrifying that she gave half the money to the DCCC candidates, the what do you call the centrist, the progressive.
I mean, it's very, very often when you see organizations that should have a narrow mission that we can all support using their member dues, whether it's a candidate or a campaign or an NGO or anyone, when they start doing things outside the box, it's not fair to their donors. I have felt the same way. Honestly, I felt the same way about about NARAL, who is an organization I've worked with because abortion rights is something.
They're like the other branch of
Planned Parenthood, the other big one.
Okay.
We would, of course, say Abortion Access Front is the number one that we care about. But all that aside, it's an issue I care a lot about. I've done a lot of work with them, and it was when all of a sudden in the 2016 campaign, they were endorsing and sending money to Hillary and stuff. It was like, you're taking money from people like me who are counting on you to support abortion rights for women because we think it's really important, and are using it in a primary where both sides support abortion rights as much as anyone needs to, and in fact the fellow who supports them more is not earning your endorsement. And so it seemed incredibly unfair to just donors who were like, that's not why I gave you $5. It's supposed to be about abortion, not about this. And so, yeah, these missions become, when it's like these teams, when it's not about the policy, when it becomes just about the team you're on, it's all out the window.
This happens a lot in the way, whenever I read Lenin throughout, and from history on, like even through history, is that a lot of, or it's not quite betrayal, but a lot of these organizations end up choosing their preservation over furthering their goals. I
think the book that's absolutely the model of this is Simone Weil's Abolition of Political Parties, Against All Political Parties, and it's a very, very thin book, and she just demolishes the idea. She's like, the very instant the first person gets their paycheck from working for a political party is the day that adventure is over. That a party serves no other purpose other than to make payroll. And guess what? Making payroll is not easy for anybody. So, that will take someone's full time. That's what a political party is. She says after the French Revolution, when there became political professionals, there has been no sort of political kind of club, entity, faction that's not just a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, and so, like I said, you'll see this a million and one times over and over and over. Kautsky's Lenin keeps harping about that. He betrayed the revolution, and it's because of how it becomes easy to choose self-preservation, and that is a flaw in the system that is not a one-time thing. Like the press lining up against Bernie. Well, if you have looked at any foreign news reporting, like Afghanistan, anything literally. And a lot of people don't realize is that the way Hillary Clinton dealt with the press issues, it's not a new phenomenon. That's the same way she dealt with issues when somebody in Africa asked her about colonialism. She basically kind of went on a gaslighting binge and told Africans to get over colonialism. But the thing is that it's just that people didn't notice that it's literally the same way they operate, but because it was like something they felt really personal or it affected them, they finally dawned on them that this is how these institutions operate. And so that was an eye-opener for many, but for me, what's the saddest thing is that people have not been able to extrapolate this. Oh, look at the way they lie about Bernie, to maybe I shouldn't believe every stupid thing that comes about Russia.
Tons of stuff, yeah.
Or maybe I shouldn't believe every random crap about, I don't know, whatever.
Look, at some point stuff does come out, no matter how much you try to lock it in. I think we've seen, just in the last 2 weeks, Russiagate crumble so vociferously that I think it's probably, honestly, these things normally aren't worth that many votes in the American congressional system. Who cares? People vote on bread and butter issues. I think it's worth 5, 6, 7 seats to the Republicans. Just being able to run that ad that's actually Hillary colluded with Russia, just sort of the fun that you can have with how much this story has collapsed just makes a lot of easy attack ads. Easy attack ads.
Easy attacks. And really, people acting completely unhinged. And I'm just saying.
Let's just leave Russia out of it. Let's have an election without. It's not about Russia. You know what I mean? Yes. They're doing their thing. We're doing our thing.
Please, that's all Russia's ever wanted for the past 100 years is for Yankees to leave them alone and don't. Yeah. But the funny, and that's why I guess I started the show, is because people saw all these phenomenons, but they didn't connect it as a larger systemic thing. So, for example, if anything, Greenpeace, Hillary Clinton accusing Greenpeace of, I don't know, being Russians or whatever, that sounds unhinged. But then when you look throughout history, literally, they've accused IWW of being both secretly German and Russian at the same time, and so on. And so these are not individual phenomenons. And the great thing about Lenin is that he wrote a lot, and he wrote about a lot of different things. For example, when the Democratic Party was like talking about their version of unity, Lenin wrote two pieces on unity, and which was really nice and sarcastic. My favorite is where Lenin makes fun of the lesser evil. It's like the greatest. It's like we should only demand small things in our fight for big things. And I was kind of hoping I could help make people make these connections into thinking that, hey, this is not a one-time thing. This is not special. This is just the way a system under capitalism works, and these things will happen again and again. So you kind of need to understand what's wrong.
Yeah, it's like anything else. It's like you put points on the board. It's not like one big thing, you know? Like, and I think especially there's a lot of psychology behind the idea of little victories versus big victories. You know, it's the time of year. It's the right time of year to be talking about things. We are at the 100 and what anniversary of the
1917.
14?
So 114. Yeah.
Anniversary of the October Revolution, as we know, took place in November. But like, it's just really interesting.
It was October under the old Greek.
The Julian calendar. Yeah. No, we're respecting Julian calendar. They do fine with it. You know, it makes things hard a bit sometimes. But no, it's the time of year to be talking about this, right? Because none of this stuff was inevitable in terms of things that happened, things that come again. The Russian Revolution was like really, you know, a series of bets made by people on conditions that were happening. I think it's why we're endlessly fascinated by it alongside the French Revolution, is that there are so many, because it is this amazing balance of personalities and politics and background and economics. It is sort of just the perfect laboratory to talk about these things. And they're not as simple as we think of it, right? Like, you know, to me, Lenin is sort of more of a man of action than a man of words. To you, he's more of a man of words than a man of action.
He has a lot of words.
Yeah, you know, I'm older. I'm older. We like Marx. We're not as hot on Engels, you know. You're a little younger. Engels is really, exactly. No, he is having this sort of rehabilitation that I think is, so there are little differences you see happen.
Okay, I did not realize this is like the Marx Engels things is a, like, I like Engels personally, just
see, it's that Marx sort of embraces the ambiguity that I think is at like the actual heart of the real moments when they happen, right? Not the kind of pure, perfect, clean, clear theory, the messiness of it all. And it's sort of what's so interesting about Lenin, right, is that he's in between these things. He is a man of action who is also thinking about what he's doing. And it's just, and I think it's what makes the writing so interesting, because it's neither critic nor uninterested propagandist.
Yeah.
It's a bit of both. And that's special, and that's in some ways unique. Even when folks like Mao and Ho Chi Minh do it, it's not quite the same. Because they're self-consciously thinking, oh, maybe they'll make a volume of my shit and put it on a shelf like they did with Lenin. Right? So it's like he's the one who already did it.
Lenin had 55. There's still timelines that have...
But someone who was worth putting on the shelf. I think the idea that naturally you put the party leader on the shelf was not a thing before.
No. Let me show you one.
That wouldn't happen. That wasn't happening in Tammany Hall in New York City, okay? You know?
This is my most prized possession. It is Lenin's collected work, the first printed edition from 1920. Napisan. Can you see? It's in Russian, so I was like,
Yeah.
It's like, this is so...
It looks like it smells like an old book from here. I can smell it from here.
I know. And then you have this is the one where, this is the first printed edition for What Is to Be Done. So, and it's funny, I actually did not pay very much money for this, actually. But this is still my most prized possession.
Nice.
Yeah.
Everybody, always look through all the used books. You never know what you will find. You will
I love it. Going to estate sales.
Estate sales, libraries, they throw this stuff out. They don't know what they have. They're just not thinking about it. Anyone who's not thinking about it, it's worth going through that box, especially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyways, what are you up to these days in Berlin? Are you still working on film, political campaigns?
I'm working on political campaigns. I have my own company committee, and I'm sort of thinking a lot about how to counter program the far right, as they are very successful in making encroachments in places like Italy and the Balkans, and have been trying to figure out ways that people can also campaign when it's not election time, because I think as we
those rules in Europe, I love them, like 75
they have
days.
these little tiny snap elections, but then in the meantime, it's just no one's talking to them except the right wing, being like, aren't you worried your immigrant neighbors are going to stab you in the middle of the night? And you're talking places that have like no crime, not just small crime, like no crime. And yet they're all somehow worried that some brown person is going to stab them in the middle of the night because someone's telling them this all year long, not just when there's an election, not just when someone wants a job. Because regular people don't like politics, they don't like politicians, and they understand it's a transaction. You maybe do something for me, and I give you what seems like a really easy, cushy bullshit job where you walk around and talk to people. I actually know that's not true. Being a politician is a pain in the ass. It's very hard. It's actually like super hard work. But that's not what the average person thinks about it. It's just, you go around, you talk all day. I should be so lucky.
Well, I was gonna say that the Bolsheviks kind of knew what to do with the far right, but you probably don't want to use that method. I call it the Lidmilla public.
Well, we live in a situation in which arms are much less evenly distributed amongst the population. And so now the far right, and especially ultranationalists and things, are almost another piece of law enforcement or the armed forces in the way that they are armed and trained and have judicial systems that will, as we just saw moments ago, dear viewers, let Kyle Rittenhouse was all charges innocent. He did nothing wrong.
Okay. It's oh my God. I hope that. Okay, we will for next week. We will find a relevant Lenin piece that talks about the bullshit of the judicial system. We already did Lenin's Black Lives Matter piece where he talks about beat but not to death, and it was really funny when I was reading it with the Fred Hampton leftist. Literally, the only thing, like the police had the same excuse, like he reached for our sword, that's why we beat him to death, blah 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 blah.
But I will say, in those early wily years that are so crazy, like Lenin specifically showed just a lot of pragmatism and a lot of open-mindedness for a lot of different things in a way that you also don't see from a lot of people. It has to be from someone who's read a lot, from who's seen a lot, because,
he had ADHD. I suspect he had ADHD because he was very...
Maybe.
But that's my theory because I have ADHD and I can recognize myself in it sounds like I can see some of the behaviors that kind of sound bizarre to everyone else. Makes perfect sense.
Well, see, I think it's as a cat lover. I'm a cat lover and he's a cat lover.
Yeah.
I feel like we see the same things through the eyes of people who are just really wanting to be petting a cat.
Okay, so I'm glad you picked this piece out because usually it's like I have to try to find something that they will find relevant and but this one
it's seasonal.
It's always season. No, but I like the advice of an onlooker because it's like it's always they're always advising. Okay, so
and it's a bit sarcastic, right? In that way that you're talking about how he's funny, right? Like this is funny. It's like, who am I to comment on such a thing? Just a guy taking a look.
Yeah. Okay. So let us begin. It's October 21st. This is when okay. So they were. Long story, but they were planning on storming the Winter Palace a little at a different time, but Trotsky kind of blabbed, and then they had to change it, and then the Kerensky government started to get ready, so they had to change the date in order for them to be surprised.
Yeah, that's right. And Trotsky being head of the Soviet at this point, the elected...
No, he was not head of the Soviet. He was the...
Head of the Petrograd Soviet.
Yeah, Petrograd Soviet, not all of it.
Yeah, not the national. Yeah, which I guess wouldn't have even necessarily been as important at the time. But Lenin is giving us advice from Finland because this is after the July insurrection in which the Bolsheviks had sort of been part of an armed revolt.
Kind of, where they failed. Where they failed.
And so some of them had to be town. So everyone's a little bit gun shy, and so Lenin is writing this letter as advice of a person who's not in town yet, but has strong opinions on this, and so you can feel a bit of the sarcasm. I'm just going to dive right in.
Go for it.
I'm writing these lines on October 8th and have little hope that they will reach Petrograd comrades by the 9th. It is possible they will arrive too late, since the Congress of the Northern Soviets has been fixed for October 10th. Nevertheless, I shall try to give my advice of an onlooker in the event that the probable action of the workers and soldiers of Petrograd and the whole region will take place soon, but has not yet taken place. It is clear that all power must pass to the Soviets. It should be equally indisputable for every Bolshevik that proletarian revolutionary power, or Bolshevik power, which is now one and the same thing, nicely done, is assured of the utmost sympathy and unreserved support of all the working exploited people all over the world in general, in the belligerent countries in particular, and among the Russian peasants especially. There is no need to dwell on these all too well-known and established truths. And I think what he's getting at there is that the basis of Bolshevik power is going to have to be with soldiers, with peasants, and with workers. This is the coalition. There's just no other question. And I'm sure this is kind of thing we talked about to death. Everyone was this is hope and change for them. They were like, all right, we get it. What must be dealt with is something that is probably not quite clear to all comrades, namely that in practice, the transfer of power to the Soviets now means armed uprising.
Yes.
This would seem, he's like, but now is the actual time to do something. This would seem obvious, but not everyone has or is giving thought to the point. To repudiate armed uprising now would mean to repudiate the key slogan of Bolshevism, all power to the Soviets, and proletarian revolutionary internationalism in general.
Yep.
Yeah. He's making the case extremely clear. But armed uprising is a special form, and this is where I get excited, because he actually brings Marx into this, and we're talking about sort of the men of thought versus the men of action, and he lets Marx be the man of action. And that's just sort of, I think, not only interesting and generous, but also I think shows how flexible Marx is, right? You can actually bring him in on these moments.
Oh no, Marx was definitely a man of action, but he was just also a man of, he was an incredible academic, I mean, he was definitely...
He glories in the margins in a way that only an academic can and should, maybe. That will be fair. Yeah. That's maybe a nice way to put it. But armed uprising is a special form of political struggle, one subject to special laws which attentive thought must be given. Karl Marx expressed this truth with remarkable clarity when he wrote that insurrection is an art quite as much as war. Of the principles of this art, Marx noted the following, and you're going to see this kind of thing in every treatise that everyone does about guerrilla war, from Mao to everyone else to everyone. 1. Never play with insurrection, but when
That's
beginning
exactly what Mao said too.
you realize firmly that you must go all the way, right? You cross the Rubicon, you do not go back. Concentrating great superiority of forces at the decisive point and at the decisive moment. Otherwise, the enemy, who has advantage of better preparation and organization, will destroy the insurgents. Yes. Once the insurrection has begun, this is 3, you must act with greatest determination and by all means without fail take the offensive. The defensive is the death of every armed uprising. He says this with the knowledge of somebody particularly who paid attention to France. Where at some point you take the barricades, and that's an act of offense because you're denying the soldiers the streets, and at some point you're defending the barricades, and that's just an act of self-defense. Same thing in Vienna in 1848, Jesus.
Vienna was worse because they got the death squads, to kill a lot of people and get the you know what I mean?
Well, this is done with Prussian efficiency. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just got to get the thing done. You really got to get in there. The French are dithering about this. 4, you must try to take the enemy by surprise and seize the moment when his forces are scattered. This is especially with 1917 Russia, with not only the forces of the actual armed forces scattered and doing badly across the front, but actually Kerensky not being in town and having his forces scattered. You must strive for daily successes. This is exactly what Esha was saying before. Number 5, you must strive for daily successes, however small. One might say hourly if it is the case of one town, and at all costs retain moral superiority. This is so true whether it's for an election or for a war. You need to have something to say that day that you all got done. People build on small successes.
Exactly.
It's not some grand thing you're building towards. Storming the Winter Palace was the result of 50 other things that people were just as stoked about.
About 50 years of work. Like it all started with them. But you'll see, like in his Petrograd, little. This is probably the size of my computer desk. It was the size of his apartment where he taught people how to read. So and those don't make it into the paper because it's like not as sexy as storming the Winter Palace.
No, but that's how a movement retains momentum, right? That's how you feed the beast. Marx summed up the lessons of all revolution, and this is where he gets to Danton, who's my favorite French revolutionary, and this is my favorite French revolutionary quote, which I will translate to English. Marx summed up the lessons of all revolutions in respect to armed uprisings in the words of Danton, the greatest master of revolutionary policy yet known, to dare again, and to keep on daring. What we remember about Danton is that the French Revolution was just a political, rich guy, white Whig revolution until the moment in which he said, and this is Lenin is saying, not only is Marx saying there are moments like this, I'm telling you, that this was a moment that happened only a couple hundred years ago, that there is the moment where the actual street takes control, where the people take control, not through representatives, but through their own consensus.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what we realize is that ultimately, everything comes from the barrel of a gun or something like that, and it's right, and what people don't realize is that the reason, I guess it's not the problem with all of politics in America is always we should elect Bernie, but then Bernie's not around. It was not about we need to figure out some way to make sure people suck less or suffer less. So that one, the one that's based on the politics or policy, it lasts forever. If that makes sense.
The left has no monopoly on insurrection, right? And so I do think when we think about January 6th and everyone's looking for conspiracy, law enforcement, and this and that and the other thing, no, what you actually saw were people who just kept going, right? It's like, what if I go through that door? What if I go through that door? What if I go through that door?
But they were headless.
This is not like a revolution, right? This is simply just being what if? There's no organization is what I'm saying, right? There's not a vast conspiracy behind it. It's just a riot. And so what you see is the idea of sort of, you have to be the one who says, it's the two things put together. First, when you start, you have to go all the way to the end. And so that means there's no stopping and breathing point. It's just you keep daring, you keep making the bet, you keep going in an organized way. You keep that momentum going, because otherwise, like you would see on January 6th or anything else, it just becomes a series of doors that you go through.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Oh, no. It's like that Alice in Wonderland Infinite Doors that makes such a good imagery.
He says here exactly what it means. Okay, perfect.
No. I'm saying when you said the doors, it just made the perfect.
Totally. Yeah, I remember that. I know that sequence exactly.
You know that where the and that's unfortunately there's a thing where a lot of people are just in the U.S. they kind of don't understand that most of this is illusory and you just don't things like just don't magically happen, and it's like the
I think
like
people think that the glue that holds everything together is rather they think they're everything is one thing and there are forces driving it together, not understanding that everything is naturally driving apart.
yes.
All hold it together very fragile. That's what I'm trying to say, I guess.
That is exactly right.
Right, and so they think of, you're just chipping away at something and you're like, that is not what's happening at all. And the instant that you actually grab the sheet and sweep it off the table, you have to keep going because there's nothing there. There are no adults. There's no perfect system.
There's no definitely no adults. You are
just you.
Yes, exactly. No adults, and it's just exactly.
It's the world that you make.
Yes, kind of. It's a world that you look at and then take the next steps. You can't just go whoosh.
The clay is wet. Now's the time.
The clay is wet. Is exactly. Exactly it. There was one about. We have one more small piece I'm trying to find. It was really funny that I know you're gonna love. It's very short. All right. It's about films actually. Hold on. Found it.
Okay. All right. Should I read this?
Yeah.
Okay. Directives on the film business by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. The People's Commissariat for Education should organize supervision of all film showings and systematize this business. All films shown in the RSFSR should be registered and numbered at the Commissariat for Education. A definite proportion should be fixed for every film showing program. Entertainment films, especially advertisement or income, of course without obscenity and counter-revolution. And B, under the heading From the Life of Peoples of All Countries, pictures with special propaganda message, such as Britain's colonial policy in India, the work of the League of Nations, the starving Berliners, etc., etc. Besides films, photographs of propaganda interests, this is wonderful, should be shown with appropriate subtitles. The privately owned cinemas should be made to yield sufficient return to the state in the form of rent, the owners to be allowed to increase the number of films and present new ones subject to censorship by the Commissariat for Education, and provided the proper proportion is maintained between entertainment films and propaganda films, coming under the heading of films from the life of peoples of all countries, in order that the filmmaker should have an incentive for producing new pictures. They should be allowed wide initiative within these limits. Pictures of a propaganda and educative nature should be checked by old Marxists and writers to avoid repetition of many sad instances where propaganda with us defeated its own purpose. Special attention should be given to organizing film showings in villages and in the East where they are novelties and where our propaganda therefore will be all the more effective.
Yeah, so the first film was called okay, the very first film that the Bolsheviks named it, it was, I believe, it was like a sarcastic title. So the best in the English translation, it's something like the British Raj and their benevolent rule or something. And and it really upset the Queen because how dare she show that all this horror that we civilizing British people bring to India. But it was very popular in the Soviet theaters, and it later was smuggled into India, and
There are also incredible Soviet films in the 1920s depicting liberation and some of the Civil War activities in Central Asia and in the Caucasus, and it's amazing stuff. Storm Over Asia by my film school education is falling short on.
You went to NYU, right?
Yeah, but I would have learned this at Cornell. That's where I got most of my film theory. Storm Over Asia by Lucas. I'll look it up and we'll tell.
I think so the
I gotta get back to Lenin though. Okay, anyway, yeah. Go ahead.
The Russian title is something like Via Revolutia yeah, it was like a whirlwind over Asia.
Is it Pudvokin?
I don't know.
Pudovkin. Absolutely, it's Pudovkin. 100% it's Pudovkin. It is Pudovkin. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So I just kind of wanted to because a lot of people don't realize these and I love downloading. These are all available for free at the Russian National Library. And the only thing is somebody needs to like a lot of them are silent films too, and it's
harder.
It's harder because for people, I don't know how people appreciate silent films. I understand them, and
it's not our world anymore. People shouldn't feel bad. People who are like, I like old movies, I don't really like silent movies. That's okay. And it's hard. I have a hard time watching silent movies.
It feels like, what are they doing? There needs to be noise.
I will say Soviet silent film is in general more dynamic and sometimes more interesting than American silent film, which is sort of more melodrama. Although you'll have to have me back some other night or something.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you should have a Soviet.
And we're going to have to do a whole thing where, because I do have a bone to pick, with some of Stahl's decisions and kind of the collapse of the Soviet film industry from being the forefront of the avant-garde world to sort of being, I don't know how I would describe it, but socialist realism, sort of the kind of failed experiments are interesting. And I think it fits that. Because the films we're talking about are some of the most, I always say that a peasant in 1930s Siberia had a much richer understanding of film than, an American sophisticated film critic in 1990, simply because they were watching extremely challenging material and not being, coddled through it. This was this is hard stuff and we're doing this. This is something we're doing together. Is watching this film. And so people just had a much richer understanding of film than we can even imagine today. They would have been literate in this thing that we are illiterate in. We need to have stories fed to us.
Literacy doesn't seem to help a lot of people these days, is what I noticed in their knowledge of the world. Sorry.
Okay, I don't want to lose the plot here, though. Okay, so Marx summed up the lessons of revolution in Uprising in the words of Dan Ton, the greatest master of revolutionary policy yet known: dare, keep daring, and dare again. Applied to Russia until October 1917, this means a simultaneous offensive on Petrograd, as sudden and as rapid as possible, which must, he's talking about insurrection, which must without fail be carried out from within and from without, from the working class quarters and from Finland, from Revel, from Kronstadt, an offensive of the entire Navy, the concentration of a gigantic superiority of forces, over 15,000 or 20,000, perhaps more, of our bourgeois guard, the officers' schools, our Vendée troops, that he's making a reference to, I think, to French troops during the revolution in Vendée, part of the Cossacks, etc. Our three main forces, the fleet, the workers, and the army units, must be so combined as to occupy without fail and to hold at any cost the telephone exchange. Again, things seem impossible till you do them, right? There's actually just a couple things you need to do.
But the telephone exchange wasn't there's probably 2 wires or something back then.
The telegraph office, probably more important. The railway station,
wires.
And above all, the bridges. Remember, Petrograd is a city of bridges, right?
Yes.
It is a
so beautiful. Oh my God, the radio. Okay, so he wants to. Oh my God, so it's the propaganda offices that. Not propaganda per se, but
we need to hold the movement of the people with the bridges, and then have the way to tell the people the good news.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
That is so elegant.
And you can tell them how to feel about it too, right? This is the thing Christian's so good at. Good news. It's just like everyone's uncertain and people are scared in what's happening in St. Petersburg. I have my family. I don't know what's happening. And it's like you have someone on the telegraph being like, good news. The workers and the soldiers are in control. It's okay.
Yeah.
The most determined elements are shock forces and young workers, as well as the best of the sailors, must be formed into small detachments to occupy all the more important points and to take part everywhere in all important operations. For example, to encircle and cut off Petrograd. They're thinking right now of the Paris Commune.
Well, on top of it, you have to remember that Leningrad, Petrograd, St. Petersburg, if you look, it's literally 35 kilometers away, or 35 miles away from Finland. And then the White Army is there. So Petrograd is it's very close. It's to a lot of like hostile territory in Europe, and you don't want the Whites as in the White Army, which is kind of like the Whites, I guess.
Right. So he wants his best forces to seize it by a combined attack of forces to seize and cut off Petrograd. By the attack of sailors, workers, and troops, a task which requires art and triple audacity. He's riffing with his Marx and his Danton. To form detachments from the best workers armed with rifles and bombs for the purposes of attacking and surrounding the enemy's centers, the officers' schools, the telegraph office, the telephone exchange. Their watchword must be, better to let a man die than let the enemy pass. This is starting to get a little tough. This is sort of like, I definitely think he's saying that. This is like, I don't think he is saying give that order directly. You tell me what you think, Esha. I think he is saying, I'm not kidding about any of this shit. Like,
Obviously,
I actually mean guns and stuff.
This is not an order because it's like a letter, but he's explaining the importance of.
I think he's just saying, and I mean it here. He's none of this was a joke. I meant actual guns and violence.
Yeah.
Let us hope that if action is decided on, the leaders will successfully apply to the great precepts of Danton and Marx. The success of both the Russian and the world revolution depends on 2 or 3 days fighting. And he was correct.
Lenin's always right.
Sorry, destroyed the world, but it was just 3 days where it was like, what's happening? It was exactly those 3 days.
And they're still scared 100 years later. I just sorry I got sidetracked with the movies because it just like
the movies are a worthy thing of getting sidetracked by. Let's
okay, but well, thank you so much for coming and reading, and this was a lot of fun. But would you be willing to do like a Soviet or movie marathon? And if we do,
absolutely. Let's do a combined thing with Late Nights with Lenin and with the committee program. Because we're sort of rebooting soon, and we should do like a movie thing.
Okay.
We should watch a bunch of stuff. We should watch some Eisenstein. We should watch some Padovkin. We should all kinds of things we should watch.
I have one question. Come and See is a very good movie, but it's is that on the table? Like, have you seen it ever?
I haven't seen it. I think anything should be on the table that is from actual. I think we should keep it to within Soviet and not post-Soviet.
Yeah, no, this is an actual Soviet movie. This is about the Belarus campaign, and it's very. Okay, the problem is that they're incredibly accurate in describing the Nazis' Belarus campaign, but the problem is that they were very accurate. Like, you see the 3 meters of blood and the faucet water turning to. So you can't. I don't know how to explain it. That's what makes the.
You're saying it's graphic. I'm okay with that. We watched a thing called Blood of the Beast, which was very.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between like it's emotionally hard to take when you see that this happened.
I think we just gotta warn the people. But otherwise, I think you gotta watch this stuff. What people have these debates. Should you not?
You should watch it.
That's up to everyone's individual thing. But like, I'm into movies of all kind, information of all kind being available to everybody.
There were
only
2 other
movies can tell a story in a way like a book or radio show can't. So
absolutely falls flat on. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and let me email you with the list, and we'll start planning. We'll start planning now.
Only 2
whenever it happens, and it'll be a joint.
Totally. The movies aren't changing, so we can make the whole plan ahead of time. That's the beauty of this. We don't have to wait for something to come out.
No, we don't exactly. So, and where do people find you? Well, on Twitter.
You find Arun Chaud, ARUNCHAUD, and otherwise I'm around. The committee program is generally on Mondays at 3 p.m., but we're actually moving everything all around, so you'll have
And
to
how
figure it
is
out.
okay? Well, with that, I'm gonna say до свидания.
До свидания.
Bye bye. It is auf Wiedersehen in German.
Auf Wiedersehen. Ja.
Okay.
Genau.
Once we went to see.
Hi everyone. I'm trying to remember where I was in Nadezhda Reminisces towards the end. So let me just play a little bit of where we left off last time, just so that I can find my place. And it'll be kind of like a what do you call it? It'll be kind of like a previously. There were only two other exiles in Shushan. Both workers. One was a social job. What happened to me? Can you see me? What happened to me? Okay, let's try this again.
See Kornatovsky. He was a good comrade and a highly educated Marxist. But life had dealt harshly with him. An unhappy childhood dominated by a cruel father. And then exile after exile, prison after prison. He had hardly ever done any work. After a month or two of freedom, he would be snatched back again for long term. He never had any real life. One little incident stands out in my memory. We were passing the sugar refinery at which he was employed. Two girls were going along, the youngest quite a little one. The elder one was carrying the empty pail, the younger one a pail with beetroots. Aren't you ashamed? A big girl like you making the little one carry things, Kornatovsky said to the bigger girl. She just looked at him with a puzzled air. We also went to test.
Okay. Now that I know where we are in chapter 2, and I don't know which page to say, so let me move back, sit back, bring my microphone near me so that you can hear me. Microphone near and here rhyme. Anyways, with that, we shall go as a bedtime story. We also went to Tess. We had received a letter from Krasnizhanskovsky saying the Ispravnik is wild with us. Tessians over some protest or other. We are not allowed to go anywhere. We have a mountain here of geological interest. Write and say that you want to explore it. Vladimir Ilyich did so just for fun and asked for the Ispranvik for permission to go to. Ispranvik is I guess they're like parole officer or something like to exile. And I'm a little lopsided. No one told me. Let me fix my lopsidedness. How do I make myself less lopsided? Ah, like this. Okay. Ah, yeah. What? Okay, I hope that's good enough. Do I sound like I'm in a tin can? Why do I sound like I'm in a tin can? Okay, let me continue. Yes! Let's see. Vladimir Ilyich did so just for fun and asked the Ispravnik for permission to go to tests both for himself and his wife, who was to assist him. The Ispravnik sent his permission by messenger. We hired a dog cart for 3 rubles, the woman assuring us that the horse was a strong beast and not a big eater at all, and off we drove. The not a big eater, however, proved to be a jibber, but we got to tests all the same. Vladimir Ilyich discussed Kant with Legniak and the Kazan study circles with Baramzin. Legniak, who had a fine voice, sang to us. That trip, on the whole, is a very pleasant memory. We went to Yarmakovskaya once or twice. The first time to adopt a revolution on the Credo. Vanyev, seriously ill with consumption, was dying, and his bed was carried out into the big room where we had all assembled. The resolution was unanimously adopted. The second time we went there to attend Vanyev's funeral. 2 of the Decembrists were soon put out of action. The Zaporozhets, who went mad in prison, and Vanyev, who died from an illness contracted there. Both passed away when the flame of the working class movement had begun to burn high. On New Year's Eve, we went to Minusинsk, where all the exiled Social Democrats had gathered. There were also exiled Narodia-Volstis in Minusинsk, Kon, Turknov, and others, but they kept aloof. These old revolutionaries were skeptical of the Social Democratic youth. They did not believe that they were real revolutionaries. In this connection, an incident occurred in the Minusинsk Uyezd shortly before my arrival in Shushenskaya. There was an exiled Social Democrat named Raichin living in Minusинsk. He was connected with the Emancipation of Labor group abroad. He decided to run away. Money was provided for his escape, but the date had not yet been fixed. Raichin was worked up to such a nervous state when he got the money that he ran away without telling anyone. The old Narodia Volosty accused the Social Democrats of having known Raichin's intended flight and not warned them about it so that they could have cleaned up in case the police made a search. Feeling ran high. Vladimir Ilyich told me about it when I arrived. There is nothing worse than these exile scandals, he said. They get people terribly worked up. These old men have bad enough nerves as it is. After what we've been through and all the convict prisons they've been in, we mustn't let ourselves get mixed up in such scandals. We have all the work ahead of us. We mustn't waste our time on such affairs. Vladimir Ilyich was for breaking with the old men. Wise decision. Hi. Sorry. I read a section of this anthology called Vaspomnyu Leninia, and And his brother Dmitry wrote this thing where Vladimir Ilyich had read a book about the Cherokees, and then he decided to reenact the scene. And there he was like pretending to be a Cherokee, and he told his brother, "Watch out for the white man. The white man is evil. You must go past the forest, but don't get caught by the white man." And I thought it was so endearing. Okay. Len would do great on Twitter today. I remember the meeting at which that break occurred. The decision to break off with them had been made earlier. It was now merely a question of putting it through as painlessly as possible. We made the break because we had to, but we did it without malice. In fact, with regret. We kept apart after that. On the whole, our exile was not so bad. Those were the years of serious study. The closer the end of our exile drew in sight, the more did Vladimir Ilyich think about the work facing us. The news from Russia was scanty, economism was gaining ground there, and there was no party to speak of. We had no printing plants in Russia, but an attempt to arrange printing through the Bund had failed. On the other hand, we could no longer confine ourselves to writing popular pamphlets without expressing our views on the fundamental questions of our works. Party work was completely disorganized, and constant arrests made any continuity impossible. People had to gone to such lengths as the credo and the ideas of the Rabochaya Missal, which is the worker's mind, a pretentious a pretentious piece, which had printed a letter from a worker, which boosted by the economists who wrote that we workers do not want any of your Marxes or Engelses. Lev Tolstoy wrote somewhere that during the first part of his journey, a person usually thinks of what he has left behind, and during the second part of what is awaiting him ahead. It was the same in exile. In the beginning, it was chiefly a matter of summing up the past. Later, we thought more about what lay ahead of us. Vladimir Ilyich gave even closer thought to the question of what was to be done to extricate the party from the plight it was in. What was to be done to direct the work into the proper channels and to ensure for a correct social democratic leadership? Where were we to begin? During the last year of his exile, Vladimir Ilyich had conceived the organizational plan, which he afterwards developed in Iskra, in the pamphlet What is to be Done, and in his letter to a comrade. The thing was to start with the organization of an all-Russian newspaper. It was to be established abroad and linked up as closely as possible with the activities and organizations in Russia, and the best possible shipping arrangements had to be made. Vladimir Ilyich hardly slept at all. He grew terribly thin. He sat up all night working out his plan in the fullest detail. He discussed it with Krzyzanowski and with me. He corresponded with Martov, Potresov about it. He made arrangements with them for going abroad. He grew more and more impatient as time went on, eager to throw himself into the work. Just then, as luck would have it, the police came down on us with a search warrant. They had found somewhere a postal receipt for a letter which Likovsky had written to Vladimir Ilyich. The letter was about a tombstone for Fedosiev, and this was a good enough excuse for the gendarmes to make a search. This was done in May 1899. They found a letter, quite an innocent one, and went through our correspondence without finding anything of interest. By old habit acquired in St. Petersburg, we kept our illegal correspondence apart from the rest. It was not much of a hiding place, though. the bottom shelf of the bookcase. Vladimir Ilyich pushed up the bench for the gendarmes to stand on as they began to search from the top shelves, which were lined with various statistical publications. They got so tired that they did not even look at the bottom shelf. Did they have donuts in Tsarist Russia? I need to ask somebody about this. Okay. And we're satisfied with my statement that it only contained my books on pedagogics. The search passed off safely, but we were afraid they might make this a pretext for adding a few more years to our term of exile. An escape in those days was not common occurrence. It became later. In any case, it would have complicated matters because before going abroad, a good deal of organizational work had to be done in Russia. Everything went well, however, our term was not increased. In February of 1900, at the end of Vladimir Ilyich's term of exile, we set out for Russia. Pasha, who had grown into a beautiful girl in the 2 years, wept rivers of tears at night. Minska busied himself collecting and lugging home the papers, pencils, books, and other odd ends that were leaving behind. Oscar came in and sat on the edge of the chair, evidently deeply agitated. He brought me a present, a handmade brooch in the form of a book with the inscription Karl Marx on it. By the way, Oscar did not know how to read before Nadezhda taught him how to read, so that makes it even more special. Aw, I would love for somebody to make me a handmade brooch with the inscription of Karl Marx on it in memory of the lessons on capital which he had taken with me. The landlady and her neighbors kept looking in. Our dog, that's Zhenka, could not make out what all the fuss was about and kept opening all the doors with his nose to make sure that everything was in proper place. Mother busied herself with packing, coughing from the dust, and Vladimir Ilyich tied the books up with the businesslike air. We arrived in Minusинsk, where we were to pick up Starkov and Olga Silvina. The whole exile fraternity were gathered there, and the mood was the usual one that prevailed whenever one of their number returned to Russia. Each was thinking when and where he would go when his time came and how he would work. Vladimir Ilyich, who had already made joint work arrangements with all those who were expecting shortly to return to Russia, and now arranged for carrying on a correspondence with those who remained. Everyone was thinking about Russia with talking trivialities. Baramzin was feeding sandwiches to Zhenka, that's Lenin's dogs. Okay, thank you. It's pronounced gendarmes. Okay, gendarmes. Tell me if I'm getting it right. I'm usually good if I hear it. I'm really bad at if I read it. So if you think I'm pronouncing any word, the best way is to make an audio of it and send it to me. And like now, I can perfectly pronounce Smrti fašizmu slobodu narodu in Croatian. So I just need to hear it. And that also works for English words. So if I keep pronouncing Ronald, whatever that, Reagan, whatever his name wrong, just, yeah. Hi! And I can't wait to see you on Monday for Mondays with Mao. Yeah. Yeah, so any language where I'm pronouncing it wrong, just make me an audio, and I'm good at repeating, copying sound. Okay. Baramzin was feeding sandwiches to Zhenka, who was being left to him as an inheritance, but the dog took no notice of him. He laid at mother's feet and did not take his eyes off her, watching her every movement. At last, fitted out in high felt boots, heel-length fur coats, etc., we started out. We traveled 300 versts down the Yenisei by sledge, day and night. Oh, by sled. Oh, it's like a sleigh. Okay. Hegemony. Okay. So when you can't pronounce, I'm gonna go down. When you can't pronounce any word, the best thing to do is look at where, like, make a map of your tongue and put your tongue in the right spots, and then practice. So hegemony. Yeah, tongue here, flat tongue. Ja is just a tongue up here. Ja, and then hegemony. Well, okay. On TikTok, I'll message you with my tongue map. That's like how I learned how to do the E sound in Russian, and the t versus the t, brat, telephone versus the th sound, and so forth. Yeah. It's tomorrow for you, Monday for me. It's Saturday for me. I'm already pretty crazy, so how much more crazy can I be driven? Okay. So they took a sleigh ride. Aw, that sounds so adorable. Taking advantage of the full. This sounds so romantic. Yep, it's a Note, latest Galaxy Note. I love it. It's a big screen. I had the old cell phone, like the old one was like Galaxy Note. Like I hadn't changed it for like 5 or 6 years. It was a really long time, and it was overheating, and so I had to get this one. So yeah. I forgot what wrapped us up carefully at every stage house, looked around to see that we had not forgotten anything, and joked with Olga Silvina, who was feeling the cold. We raced at top speed, and Vladimir Ilyich, he rode without the top fur coat, assuring us that he felt too hot in it, and he sat with his hands thrust into a muff he borrowed from Mother, his thoughts flying ahead of him to Russia, where he would be able to work to his heart's content. See, this is another inappropriate ID. Okay, I don't have any mods. I think so I can't kick anyone out. So I apologize. So just ignore them. Okay, so this adds to my theory, because I often don't feel cold in the winter, and I wonder if it's like an ADHD thing. So this adds to my Lenin has ADHD theory. But okay. At Ufa, we received a visit from the local comrades of the day of our arrival, A.D. Tsurupa, Svidevsky, and Krochmal. We've been to 6 hotels, Krochmal said, stuttering. At last we found you. Oh my God, I would love to have friends who would like go to hotel after hotel just to find me. Aw, those are good friends. I guess nowadays people don't have to go through 6 hotels to find other people because we have telephones, but whatever. Okay. Vladimir Ilyich spent 2 days in Ufa, and after having talked with the locals, he entrusted me and Mother to the care of our comrades and moved on nearer to St. Petersburg. All I remember of these 2 days was a visit to Chetvergova, an old Narodovalyet whom Vladimir Ilyich had known. Oh, in Kazan. Okay, I know this was this late. Okay, I know exactly who she is. I read it in his sister Anna's memories. So, I can't really explain anymore. She had a bookshop in Ufa. Vladimir Ilyich went to see her the very first day, and there was a peculiar gentleness in his voice and her face when he spoke to her. When later I read what Vladimir Ilyich had written at the end of his What Is to Be Done, I recalled that visit. Many of them, meaning the young social democrat leaders of the worker movement, Vladimir Ilyich wrote in What Is to Be Done, began their revolutionary thinking as adherents of Narodnaya Volya. Nearly all of them in their youth enthusiastically worshipped the terrorist heroes. It required a struggle to abandon the captivating impressions of these heroic traditions. It was accompanied by a break of personal relations with people who were determined to remain loyal to the Narodia Volya and for whom the young social democrats had profound respect. This passage is a piece of Vladimir Ilyich's own biography. It was a pity we had to part just when the real work was starting, but it did not even enter our heads that Vladimir Ilyich could remain in Ufa when he had a chance to move nearer to St. Petersburg. Vladimir Ilyich went to live in Pskov, where Patrasov and L.N. Radchenko with his children afterwards resided. Vladimir Ilyich once laughingly related how Radchenko's little girl Zenyurka and Lyuda used to mimic him and Patrasov. They would walk up and down the room together with their hands behind their back, one saying Bernstein and the other answering Kautsky. So Lenin was already mad at Kautsky. That is really funny. There in Pskov, Vladimir Ilyich assiduously wove the threads of the organization that were to closely tie up the future all Russian newspapers abroad with activities at home. He had meetings with Babushkin and many other comrades. The cool thing about Babushkin is he was a worker in St. Petersburg, and Lenin actually taught him how to read. And Babushkin went on to start his own newspaper, and then he died in 1908 from one of those old measles or tuberculosis or something. Yeah. And Lenin wrote a eulogy to Babushkin. And Babushkin means grandpa, I guess. I don't know. Little grandpa. Gradually, I acclimatized myself to Ufa and got translation work and some lessons. There had been one of those exile scandals in Ufa shortly before my arrival, as a result of which the Social Democrats had split into the two camps. The Krochmal Tsyurupa Swiderski in the other, and the Plazin brothers Saltukov and Kvatkovsky. Chechina and Aptekinan were neutral and maintained relations with groups. First group stood near to me, and I soon became associated with it. This group did some kind of work, and this was more active of the local fraternity. They had connections with railway workshops where there was a circle of social democratic workers, as in teaching them how to read. The most active worker was Yakutov. He often came to see me to get books and have a talk. He spoke a lot about popularizing Marx, but when he did manage to get the book, he could not read it. I haven't the time, he complained to me. You know how it is with the peasants coming to me with their troubles. You've got to talk to them so they won't think bad of themselves and leaves you with no time. He said his wife Natasha was a sympathizer and that exile did not scare them. He'd get anywhere on his hands. Anywhere. He'd get on anywhere. His hands would always feed him. He was well up in the secrecy tactic And there was nothing he hated more than heroics, boasting, claptrap. Everything had to be done quietly and efficiently. Yakutov was the president of the republic that was set up in Ufa in 1905. Later, during the years of reaction, he was hanged in the Ufa prison. He died in the prison yard while the whole prison sang. They sang in every cell and swore never to forget his death and never to forgive it. I also helped other workers in their studies. One was a young metal worker employed at a small factory who told me the life of the local workers. He was a very high-strung and nervous man. I learned afterwards that he went over to the socialist revolutionaries and became insane in prison. One of my visitors was a consumptive bookbinder named Krulov, who painstakingly made double bindings to hide illegal manuscripts in, and made paste, board out of manuscripts to be used in binding. He told me the work of the local printers. Oh, I see. Because the books were thick, you put the pages in, and then you would hide the illegal pages, and then you'd paste it. So then if you knew that there's a second book, you could like rip apart the binding. That is very okay. God. Okay, no. Okay, have you guys seen Deep Space Nine when Bajor signs a non-aggression pact with the Dominion? Is it because Bajor was colluding with the Dominion, or was it so that Bajor could buy time? I don't know. Okay, He told me about the work of the local printers. Subsequent correspondence letters sent to Iskra was based on these stories. We carried out our work at the neighboring factories as well as in Ufa itself. The doctor's assistant at the Ust-Khatavsk works was a social democrat. She conducted propaganda among the workers and distributed illegal popular literature, which was needed so badly. There were several social democratic students at various factories. Our UFA organization had an illegal agent in Ekaterinburg, a worker named Mazanov who had returned from Turukhansk, where he had been in exile together with Martov. The work made no headway with him, though. Ufa was the gubernia center, and the exiles of Sterlitamak, Birsk, and other Uyaz towns were always trying to obtain permission to go there. Besides, Ufa laid on the road between Russia to Siberia. That's a long road. Comrades returning from exile stopped over to make arrangements about work. Among these were Martov. He had not been able to get away from Turukhansk in time. G.I. Akulova and Panin. Lydia Knipovich, uncle, came illegally from Astrakhan, and Rumyantsev and Portugalov came from Samara. Martov went to live in Poltava. We were in touch with him and hoped to receive literature through him. The literature arrived, I think, a week after my departure, and the Kwiatkowski, who went to fetch it, got 5 years in Siberia for his pains. The box containing the literature had broken open on the way. As a matter of fact, he was not an active member of the organization and had only undertaken to go for the parcel because it was addressed to the brewery, the daughter whose proprietor he had been giving lessons to. There were Narod Volsty in Ufa too, Leonovich, and afterwards the Borozdich. Just before leaving the country, Vladimir Ilyich had a narrow escape. He arrived in St. Petersburg from Pskov together with Martov. They were shadowed and arrested. He had 2,000 rubles in his waistcoat, which he had received from Auntie A.M. Kalmukova, and a list of contacts written in invisible ink on the back of an ordinary invoice. Had it occurred to the gendarmes to hold that invoice before a fire, Vladimir Ilyich would never have established an all-Russian newspaper abroad. But he was in luck. After 10 days or so, he was released. After that, he came to Ufa to say goodbye to me. He told me what he had succeeded in doing since we had last met, and the people he managed to see. Naturally, a number of meetings were held on this occasion of his arrival. I remember that when it transpired that Leonid, who considered himself a Narodovolyet, had not even heard about the emancipation of labor group, Vladimir Ilyich flared up. Fancy a revolutionary not knowing that? How can he intelligently choose a party he's going to work with when he does not even know, has not even studied what was the emancipation of labor group has written? He sounds like me. Okay. Vladimir Ilyich stayed about a week, I believe, in Ufa. He wrote me from abroad, chiefly by ciphered messages written in books, which he addressed to various Zemstvo men. Zemstvos men were like the city councils. Things were not moving as fast with the newspaper as Vladimir Ilyich desired. Did I accidentally make it to the next chapter, or no? Nope. Still on the same chapter. Okay, sorry. He had trouble in coming to an understanding with Plekhanov. His letters were short and cheerless and ended with, "I shall tell you about it when I come over." I have written down for you a full account of the conflict with Plekhanov. Oh yeah, it's really funny because it's called How the Spark Was Nearly Extinguished. And in it, Lenin says things like, we were very frustrated because we could not, we had suppressed our feelings. And I'm like, I don't believe Lenin's ever suppressed his feelings any moment in his life, but whatever. I could hardly wait for the end of my exile. On top of it, I had not received any letters from Vladimir Ilyich for a long time. I had intended to go to Astrakhan to see uncle, Lydia Knipovich, but it was too great hurry. Mother and I went to see Maria Alexandrovna, Vladimir Ilyich's mother, in Moscow. She was alone there at the time, her daughters Maria being in prison and Anna being abroad. I was very fond of Maria Alexandrovna. She was always so tactful and considerate. Vladimir Ilyich loved his mother very much. She has tremendous willpower, he told me. If this ever happened to my brother when father was alive, I don't know what he would have done. Actually, it's kind of funny because in a letter to his mother, Lenin says, it would be nice if you were to like go meet NK, which is Nadezhda Krupskaya. And then his mother like goes, not only meets her, like she arranges the marriage, and then she like writes a letter saying like, oh yeah, we spoke with like the police or the judge, and they said that you guys can do exile together if you guys get married. So the priest is gonna come on the train, like as soon as she gets off on the train, you're gonna get married in Siberia. Like it was so cute. Like she had proposed marriage to her. to Nadezhda herself, like, because she kind of understood that Lenin, I guess, loved her, but it was so cute. Vladimir Ilyich inherited his mother's strength of mind as well as her tact and kindness towards people. When we lived abroad, I tried to describe our life to her in my letters as lively as a way as I could to make her feel a bit nearer to her son. When Vladimir Ilyich was in Siberia in exile in 1897, I had not joined him yet. The papers published an obituary notice on Maria Alexandrovna Ulyanova, who had died in Moscow. Engberg told me, I came to see Vladimir Ilyich and he was white as a sheet. My mother is dead, he says. But the obituary notice turned out to be that of another woman of the same name. Maria Alexandrovna had suffered much with the execution of her eldest son and the death of her daughter Olga and the repeated arrests of her other children. When Vladimir Ilyich fell ill in 1895, she came immediately to him and cooked his food herself. His arrest found her at her old post again, sitting for hours in the gloomy waiting room in the house of preliminary detention, coming to see him and visiting day and bringing him parcels. But for a slightly shaky head, she had not changed a bit. I promised to look after Vladimir Ilyich, but I could not keep my promise. From Moscow, I took my mother From Moscow, I took my mother to St. Petersburg, where I fixed her up and went abroad. I had some amusing adventures on that trip. I went to Prague in the belief that Vladimir Ilyich was living there under the name of Madrachik. I sent him a telegram. At Prague, no one met me. I waited as long as I could, then greatly embarrassed, I hailed a top-hatted cabbie, piled my baskets onto his cab and rode off. When we arrived in a working class quarter and stopped outside of a great tenement house in a narrow turning, a multitude of feathering beds were being aired in the open windows of the building. I flew up to the 4th floor. A fair-headed little Czech woman answered the door. All I could say was, Madraček, Herr Madraček. A workman came out. I am Madraček, he said. Bewildered, I stammered, no, it's my husband. At last, Madraček saw daylight. Ah, you must be the wife of Herr Rittmeyer. He lives in Munich but sent books and letters to you in Ufa through me. Madraček spent the whole day with me. I told him about the Russian movement. He told me about the Austrian movement. His wife showed me her needlework and treated me to a meal of Czech dumplings. I arrived in Munich in a fur coat when there were people going in dresses. Made wise by experience, I left my luggage in the cloakroom and went in search of Rittmeyer by train. I found the house, flat number 1. It turned out to be a beer house. I approached the fat little German behind the bar and timidly asked for Herr Rittermeyer with the feeling that something was wrong. That's me, said the publican. The publican, absolutely cursed. I mumbled, no, it's my husband. And we stood staring at each other like a couple of idiots. At last, Rittmeyer's wife came in, glancing at me. Ah, it must be Herr Meyer's wife. He is expecting his wife from Siberia. I'll take you to him. I followed Frau Rittmeyer through the backyard of a building to an untenanted-looking flat. I don't know what this word means. Property not occupied by tenants. Door opened, and there at the table sat Vladimir Ilyich Martov and Anna Ilyachina, that's his sister. Forgetting to thank my guide, I began to give Vladimir Ilyich, damn it, couldn't you write and tell me where you were? I did, but I've been going to the station to meet you 3 times a day. How did you get here? Afterwards, we learned that the Zemstvo man whom the book with the address had been sent kept the book to read. Many Russians traveled afterwards in the same manner. Shliakinov first went to Genoa instead of Geneva. Babushkin very nearly landed in America instead of London. Wow. That is a complicated method of traveling. If you have to imagine if you had to go to the New York City Council and find some random book to see where your husband was. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode of Late Nights with Lenin and Nadezhda Reminisces. We'll be here for next week because we don't believe in celebrating Thanksgiving. And I'm thinking about having something fun for Thanksgiving for those of you who are probably bored and stiff to death on Thanksgiving, but I have not decided yet. So stay tuned. And with that, if I don't get any super chats within the next 5 minutes, I'm leaving because I'm tired. Oh, thank you so much, Shane, for the $20. A Shiba dog in Samurai. Thank you so much. Aw, that was so sweet. Okay. Thank you, Shane. Shane, you're from Australia? Well, you should come on Late Nights with Lenin. Anyways. Slobodu narodu, smrti fašizmu.